Sphingidae. Sphingidae. The Sphingidae are a family of moths, Lepidoptera called sphinx moths, also colloquially known as hawk moths, with many of their caterpillars known as hornworms. It includes about 1450 species. It is best represented in the tropics, but species are found in every region. They are moderate to large in size and are distinguished among moths for their agile and sustained flying ability, similar enough to that of hummingbirds as to be reliably mistaken for them. Their narrow wings and streamlined abdomens are adaptations for rapid flight. The family was named by French zoologist Pierre André Latreille in 1802. Some hawk moths, such as the hummingbird hawk-moth or the white-lined sphinx, hover in midair while they feed on nectar from flowers, so are sometimes mistaken for hummingbirds. This hovering capability is only known to have evolved 4 times in nectar feeders, in hummingbirds, certain bats, hoverflies, and these sphingids, an example of convergent evolution. Sphingids have been much studied for their flying ability, especially their ability to move rapidly from side to side while hovering, called swing hovering or side slipping. This is thought to have evolved to deal with ambush predators that lie in wait in flowers. Sphingids are some of the faster flying insects. Some are capable of flying at over 5.3 ms/s 12 miles per hour. They have wingspans from 4 cm 1.6 into over 10 cm 3.9 m. Description: antennae are generally not very feathery, even in males. They lack tympanal organs, but members of the group Chorocompini have hearing organs on their heads. They have a frenulum and retinaculum to join hindwings and forewings. The thorax, abdomen, and wings are densely covered in scales. Some sphingids have a rudimentary proboscis, but most have a very long one, which is used to feed on nectar from flowers. Most are crepuscular or nocturnal, but some species fly during the day. Both males and females are relatively long-lived, 10 to 30 days. Prior to flight, most species shiver their flight muscles to warm them up, and, during flight, body temperatures may surpass 40 deg C 104 deg F. In some species, differences in form between the sexes is quite marked. For example, in the African species Agrias convolvuli, the convolvulus or morning glory hawk moth, the antennae are thicker and wing markings more mottled in the male than in the female. Only males have both an undivided frenular hook and a retinaculum. Also, all male hawk moths have a partial comb of hairs along with their antennae. Females call males to them with pheromones. The male may douse the female with a pheromone before mating. Behavior: some species fly only for short periods, either around dusk or dawn, while other species only appear later in the evening and others around midnight, but such species may occasionally be seen feeding on flowers during the day. A few common species in Africa, such as the oriental beehawk Cephinodes hylas virescens, Macroglossum hirundo, and Macroglossum trochilus are diurnal. A number of species are known to be migratory, all in the Sphingidae and Macroglossinae, and specially in the genera Agrias, Cephinodes, Macroglossum, Hippotion, and their trap. Flight: in studies with Manduca sexta, moths have dynamic flight sensory abilities due to their antennae. The antennae are vibrated in a plane so that when the body of the moth rotates during controlled aerial maneuvers, the antennae are subject to the inertial Coriolis forces that are linearly proportional to the angular velocity of the body. The Coriolis forces cause deflections of the antennae, which are detected by the Johnston's organ at the base of each antenna, with strong frequency responses at the beat frequency of the antennae around 25 Hz and at twice the beat frequency. The relative magnitude of the two frequency responses enables the moth to distinguish rotation around the different principal axes, allowing for rapid course control during aerial maneuvers. Life cycle. Cycle. Most species are multivoltine, capable of producing several generations a year if weather conditions permit. Females lay translucent, greenish, flattened, smooth eggs, usually singly on the host plants. Egg development time varies highly, from 3 to 21 days. Sphingid caterpillars are medium to large in size, with stout bodies. They have 5 pairs of prolutes. Usually their bodies lack any hairs or tubercles, but most species have a horn at the posterior end, which may be reduced to a button, or absent in the final instar. Many are cryptic greens and browns, and have countershading patterns to conceal them. Others are more conspicuously colored, typically with white spots on a black or yellow background along the length of the body. A pattern of diagonal slashes along the side is a common feature. When resting, the larva usually holds its legs off the surface and tucks its head underneath praying position, which, resembling the great Sphinx of Giza, gives rise to the name sphinx moth. Some tropical larvae are thought to mimic snakes. Larvae are quick to regurgitate their sticky, often toxic, foregut contents on attackers such as ants and parasitoids. Development rate depends on temperature, and to speed development, some northern and high-altitude species sunbathe. Larvae burrow into the soil to pupate, where they remain for 2 to 3 weeks before they emerge as adults. In some Sphingidae, the pupa has a free proboscis rather than being fused to the pupal case as is most common in the Lepidoptera. They have a cremaster at the tip of the abdomen. Usually they pupate off the host plant in an underground chamber among rocks or in a loose cocoon. In most species, the pupa is the overwintering stage. Food plants. Larvae, e. Sphingid larvae tend to be specific feeders rather than generalists. Compared to similarly sized saturniids, sphingids eat soft young leaves of host plants with small toxic molecules and chew and mash the food into very small bits. Some species can tolerate quite high concentrations of specific toxins. Tobacco hornworms Manduca sexta detoxify and rapidly excrete nicotine, as do several other related sphinx moths in the subfamilies Sphingidae and Macroglossinae, but members of the Smeranthinae that were tested are susceptible. The species that are able to tolerate the toxin do not sequester it in their tissues. 98% was excreted. However, other species, such as Hyles euphorbiae and Daphnes nereae, do sequester toxins from their hosts, but do not pass them on to the adult stage. Adults Most adults feed on nectar, although a few tropical species feed on isocretions, and the death's head hawk-moths steal honey from bees. Night-flying sphingids tend to prefer pale flowers with long corolla tubes and a sweet odor, a pollination syndrome known as sphingophily. Some species are quite general in visitations, while others are very specific, with the plant only being successfully pollinated by a particular species of moth. Orchids frequently have such specific relations with hawk moths and very long corolla tubes. The comet orchid Angraecum sesquipedale, a rare Malagasy flower with its nectar stored at the bottom of a 30 cm long 12-in tube, was described in 1822 by Louis-Marie Aubert du Petit-Thouars, and later Charles Darwin famously predicted there must be some specialized moth to feed from it. A sesquipedale has nectaries 11.5 inches long 29 cm, with only the lower inch and a half 3.8 cm filled with very sweet nectar. It is, however, surprising that any insect should be able to reach the nectar. Our English sphinxes have proboscis as long as their bodies, but in Madagascar there must be moths with 30 cm. Alfred Russel Wallace published a sort of wanted poster properly, a drawing in a book of what this Lepidopteran might look like, and, concurring with his colleague, added, "The proboscis of a hawk moth from tropical Africa Xanthopan morganae is 7 inches and a half 19 cm. A species having a proboscis 2 or 3 inches longer 7.6 cm could reach the nectar in the largest flowers of Angraecum sesquipedale, whose nectaries vary in length from 10 to 14 inches 36 cm. That such a moth exists in Madagascar may be safely predicted, and naturalists who visit that island should search for it with as much confidence as astronomers searched for the planet Neptune, and they will be equally successful. The predicted Sphingid was discovered 21 years later and described as a subspecies of the one African species studied by Wallace, Xanthopan morganea predicta, for which the subspecific name predicta, the predicted one, was given. The Madagascan individuals had a pink, rather than white, breast and abdomen, and a black apical line on the forewing, broader than in mainland specimens. Molecular clock models using either rate or fossil-based calibrations imply that the Madagascan subspecies X. morgani predicta and the African subspecies morgani diverged 7.4 plus 2.8 MY million years ago, which overlaps the divergence of a sesquipedale from its sister, A. sororium, named. Since both these orchids have extremely long spurs likely existed before that and were exploited by long-tongued moths similar to Xanthopan morganae predicta. The long geological separation of subspecies morgani and predicta matches their morphological differences in the color of the breast and abdomen. Relationships and species. The Sphingidae is sometimes assigned its own exclusive superfamily, Sphingoidea, but is alternatively included with the more encompassing Bommacoidea. Following Hodges' 1971, two subfamilies are accepted, namely the Sphingidae and Macroglossinae. Around 1450 species of hawk-moths are classified into around 200 genera. Some of the best-known hawk-moth species are privet hawk-moth Sphinx ligustri, white-lined Sphinx hyles lineata, death's head hawk-moth Acrontia atropos, lime hawk-moth Mimas tillii, poplar hawk-moth Laethopopuli, convolvulus hawk-moth Agrius convolvuli, Catalpa sphinx Ceratomia catalpi, hummingbird hawk-moth Macroglossum stellatarum, elephant hawk-moth Delaphila elpiner, vine hawk-moth Hippotion cellurio, spurge hawk-moth Hyles euphorbii, olander hawk-moth Daphnes nereae, Pandora sphinx moth Eumorpha pandoris, tomato worm Manduca quinquimaculata, tobacco hornworm Manduca sexta.